The Human Founder Podcast by Gali Bloch-Liran.
Hi, I'm Gali Bloch-Liran and welcome to The Human Founder, the podcast where we speak about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Entrepreneurs often describe the emotional roller coaster that is embedded in being an entrepreneur investor, where you experience the lowest of lows or saddest of sads when you... טוב, רגע, לא יצא לי טוב שנייה, or saddest of ever moment. כן, לא רגילה לזה. of saddest of...
יכולה גם להגיד lowest of lows, זה בסדר.
בסדר. טוב, אני מתחילה מההתחלה, 3:34. לחתוך התחלה. Hi, I'm Gali Bloch-Liran and welcome to The Human Founder, the podcast where we speak about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Entrepreneurs often describe the emotional roller coaster that is embedded in being an entrepreneur investor, where you experience the lowest of lows or the saddest moment. זה נתקע לי.
עזבי את הסאדסט.
אני מוחקת את זה. זה מתחרבש לי. בסדר? מתחרבש לי בהתחלה.
lowest of lows, highest of highest.
מתחילה מההתחלה, פעם שלישית, ונמשיך. אני מתרגשת בגללך, בועז.
כן, אני רואה.
אתה רואה? Hi, I'm Gali Bloch-Liran and welcome to The Human Founder, the podcast where we speak about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Entrepreneurs often describe the emotional roller coaster that is embedded in being an entrepreneur investor, where you experience the lowest of lows when you lose your dad, and the highest of highs when you have a play of your produced in the States and ending with standing ovation, and everyone are cheering and happy about it. And it's from that place of uncertainty, the need to constantly self-manage ourselves, keep up our energy and be mentally resilient in order to deal with everything. Well, it's not easy. In each episode, I will be talking to entrepreneurs, investors, psychologists, being their sounding board, with the goal of creating a space for this less spoken about layer, which is the mental aspect accompanying the entrepreneurial journey. I will also share tips and tricks to help boost your focus, clarity, and mental resilience. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Boaz Gaon. Hey, Boaz, and it's really, really great to have you here with me.
Hey, Gali, it's great to be here.
You're so cheering and smiling.
I'm happy to be here. I've been following your podcast, and I'm happy that I'm sitting on this chair.
So it's really exciting for me as well, as we, for some time now working together. It's really exciting to allow you to share your story to all our listeners. So let's introduce you. Boaz, you're the founder and CEO of Wisdo, a leading in providing social health to 124 million Americans who self-report recording breaking degrees of loneliness. You actually come to save
humanity.
Humanity from loneliness. You're also a playwright and a novelist, a proud father of two, and blues pianist whose neighbors have issues with his playing.
That is true.
So I remember that when I just met you, I was really amazed from all your talents and all the things that you can do, and found
That's it, by the way. The no other talents. That's it. That's a short list, but it stops being impressive at this point.
Well, I think it's a short list that embraces so many things within it, but it's really amazing how from being a journalist and a writer and novelist and a pianist and all those creativity, and actually you're an artist, all those things, how you bring them into your entrepreneurship and into Wisdo, and we'll talk about it during our conversation. And I think that it actually emphasizes all the many, many aspects that you have as a person, as a founder, as an entrepreneur. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. You come with a red shirt. You're like okay, let's see what goes on in here.
That's it. You give an artist a stage and that's it. The lights go on and then he's on.
And all he can is just to perform.
Yes, that is true. You're doing it for the audience.
Great.
Or for the users, which are essentially an audience.
Yeah. And it's definitely the same, just different jargon, depends in the surrounding. Boaz, take us to your family, to where you were born, how you were raised, what happened in your family, being a son to a very, very well-known, familiar family in Israel that is part of the roots of the Israeli economy. And what does it feel like to grow in such a family?
Well, like people always say, we don't have the benefit of being born to a different family, so it's very difficult to compare. But I was born in a town called Ramat HaSharon, which is a small suburb north of Tel Aviv. For those of you who do not live in Israel, my father was a very well-known businessman by the name of Boaz Gaon, Gaon. If you want to look that up on Google. My father was CEO of a company called Kur. Kur at some point owned about 20% of the Israeli economy when the Israeli economy was still socialized or partly owned by the government. And he led the transformation of that company and, by proxy, the Israeli economy from economy that is socially owned to economy that is, free market. He took that company on when it was in a very difficult position, left the company when it was one of the most successful companies in the country, and then started his own holdings company. So, I grew up in that environment. I was, like most sons, not that interested in what my father, was doing. But he was always, a very charismatic, powerful, well-connected, funny, warm individual. And I think that partly what we're trying to do at Wisdo, what I'm trying to do as Wisdo's founder and CEO, is to emulate a manager's ability to be not only a leader to the people that he worked with, but also not lose the fact that these are people at the end of the day, and they need support as much as you do.
But wait, I won't make it that easy on you, We'll get Wisdo down the road, we'll get Wisdo, wait a second. So that's Dad, and a bit about Mom and your brothers, and you're also a twin brother, so you have it all.
I have it all. I have some of it. We're 4 children. I have a twin brother. His name is Yoav. We're not identical at all. He's very different from each other. We're also very similar, but you wouldn't know it from looking at us. He's much more tall and athletic and attractive. I have an older brother. Who's also, fairly known in the world of business and in the worlds of advertising and political strategy. And I have an older sister. So all in all, we're 4 people, very different from each other. But it's interesting to see how, what are the junctions where all of us are very similar. My mom is still around and love her to death. She's 87. She just called.
On record.
On record. A feisty Greek woman who came to Israel when she was 6 years old from the Holocaust. And that's the family. My uncle is a well-known singer. I'll just throw that in. But yeah,
you had to.
I had to, and he's great, and he's a great guy.
So it's like many of the people of your family. You're talking about your dad and your uncle and your 2 brothers, each one in a different arena. Like all practicing key performance in different areas of their life, whether it is on business, as a singer, whether it is in the political world, whether it is on the sports court. Everyone are like practicing key performance all the time. And you're growing up in this family. And you're choosing to pave a different path, which is also very much a key performance, but a totally different, more vulnerable, let's say, more connected to its feelings, more creative in a way, because you create and you choose to write and you choose to have a plays and you choose to write a book and you choose to play. And take us a little bit there. How growing up in a family which is so, the business is so strong in it, and this is like the way that you're supposed to be growing, but you're choosing your own path and what it entails within it by doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's true that we were and are a very kind of high-achieving family. And our Friday dinners when my father sat at the head of the table, very paternalistic kind of a manner of the Lord of the Manor, environment. The conversation was essentially about all of our achievements in the past week, and all of us had to.
It was your weekly, actually.
Yeah, it
your
was
weekly family.
Yeah, it was a board essentially.
A board, because
board.
he
was chairman of the board, and we were all members of the board.
It's an interesting way to put it.
Yes, it is. It's a very interesting family, but very lovingly, and a lot of jokes and a lot of humor. But I think it was very important for my father that all of us, leave our mark and contribute something to humanity that we care about. And yes, it is stressful, and there's pressure underneath, and there's competition underneath, including between brothers and sisters. But I think that as long as parents are able to give their children the freedom to pursue whatever they end up deciding to pursue that they feel they can excel in, regardless of what that is, then I think that's a good thing. I think the problem starts when it's not necessarily, I want you to succeed and I want you to be very successful.
But in this way.
Yes, I want you to do what I did or what I think that you should do, regardless if you're going to be successful or not, which I think where misery is very commonplace. In my case, my dad very much wanted me to be a lawyer. I really did not want to be a lawyer. And at the end of my first year of law school, I announced that I'm going on a break, which is still going on.
Kind of.
Well, who knows?
Depends in whose eyes, this kind of break.
It's at this point at no one's eyes. It's very clear that it became very clear that this is not for me. And yes, it was hard for him. But again, credit to him to give us to be in a place where all of us grew up understanding that doing something that you don't like is going to lead to you doing something that you're not great at, which is going to lead to you being very unhappy. So there's nothing to be gained. And I think that as soon as he saw me becoming, fairly, successful is a strong word, but fairly successful as a writer and as a journalist and investigative reporter and, and the stuff that I did, he became very proud. And just to complete, the Freudian legend here, obviously his father is a writer or was a writer, and his father was an historian. And I think, and his brother is a singer and an artist. So I think something went on there where he was concerned that this life that he didn't know and didn't pursue, even though he did have some artistic, tendencies, is not a world that he can control. So he can ensure my happiness in that world. If I stay close to things that he knows more about, he would be able to be more influential and make sure that, at least I'm not going to be, I'm not going to starve. So I think...
But you're describing it like very rationally, and I hear it, and I hear you. Can you say if you felt also underneath, maybe in a subconscious way, that you're disappointing him or maybe disappointing yourself? Because even though this was like your natural choices, they weren't good enough, or maybe in the coin of, money, they weren't successful enough, and maybe just self-fulfillment is not considered good enough. So did you also have those kind of voices in your head that...
Never. And I don't know why. I'm trying to think about it. I've looked back because I have many friends, including friends who went to law school with me, who were miserable for 3 years and then were miserable for another 3 when they did their, internship. And then like 15 years after, they went back to studying that thing that they knew that they care a lot about. And I was never in that place. Not clear to me why. I think when there's something that you enjoy doing and that you know that you're good at it, it's very difficult to give that up. And yes, I think it was, and then we can throw in some stuff like, I had a girlfriend at the time that was very supportive, and she was from a very different family, family of academics, and her father was, we were very, very close to her father. But no, I never felt that I'm making a mistake or I'm not good enough. I knew that I'm not going to be who I wanted to be if I veer in that direction.
I love hearing it, and I think that one of the things that really comes out of you and knowing you deeper than just this conversation is your stamina and how connected you are to your inner self and navigating this world by really being authentic and true to who you are, and not just for the external expectations and what other people think that should be or should happen, but really, really creating your own path and really believing in what you're doing and being authentic about it without being cliche. Mm-hmm. And that also gave you many credits later on and many successful moments. But it requires a lot of inner belief and stamina and resilience in order to be able to deal with this outside world that where money has a strong voice in it, and external expectations and governmental issues and business world and etc. And it's like many strengths and powers that comes from the outside into our inner surrounding, and us needs to be very strong and clear about what we want in order to make sure that external voices that are not ours will not get inside what we want to see and how we need to see life. And many times it's not easy to have this barrier and have this ability to say no to things that maybe can be very tempting, maybe the easy things to do, even if it's not easy, even when it's not easy, but it's like the natural thing to do. And it requires a lot of, being with a self-confidence of who you are and how do you want to live life. And I think that over and over during life, there are all the time those tests, once again, you ask yourself, am I still continuing in this way? Am I still true to myself? And every time from the beginning, you're confronting it and have to look inside and really feel that it's still true for you.
So I'm going to say something that is maybe unfair, and maybe I don't want to be cruel to everyone who's listening. And believe me, I have had my share of compromises, like all of us, because we have to live in the real world. But I firmly believe that if you take a human being and you put him in a room and ask him or her, regardless of money, regardless of circumstance, do you know what you want to do in life? Mm-hmm. Do you know what will make you happy if you pursue it? And even if you're mildly successful, that you're going to thrive. I think that close to 100% are going to say yes. And that thing is something that they have identified when they were young. And then it's a question, and that is, I think, where our role as parents kick in, is, were there people in the world who gave them the license to pursue that? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's a matter of not knowing. I think it's a matter of understanding that that thing is real, and B, again, this is where the bad news kick in, that life is short, and we will not live for long,
and to have the guts to really go for it.
But what other alternative do you have, really?
You can say it because you're very in a high developmental stage, and very much able to look inside and understand it. But not all people are in the same consciousness level, and there are many people that don't feel that they are either that they know how, or that they are allowed to, or that they have the guts even to go for it. So I am saying it like with cautious, because I really believe together with you that all we need is like one person to believe in us, right? And to give us the hand and allow us. And by the way, it's in different stages of life. It can be when we are children, and it can be also when we are very executives in very high level position, or founders of startups, or after IPO, like when we are advanced already. And also there we have our breakdowns, and we need someone to give us the hand and help us to see further.
Absolutely.
But it requires, I think, deep level of consciousness and the ability to really attune to ourselves and to have this conversation with ourselves.
I agree. Or just fear of losing this one go, which essentially is a very good motivator. I've investigated the history of my family a little bit, and beyond the mythology of the Gaon clan, behind it all, there's a guy who's my grandfather, my dad's dad, who was 20 years old when he left his home in Bosnia, and came to Jerusalem and wanted to save the history, the Sephardic history of the Jewish people, and started writing this 1,000-page book that no one eventually read until my father and his brother came along and republished the book. But I think what my father and his brother saw in their father, which is a use case of someone who was very talented and very driven, but wasn't able to implement his talent and his passions in a way that led to a successful professional career, is something that they were haunted by. And I think somehow that kind of became the DNA of the family. Even if I ended up
have a successful career in every path you choose.
Successful is also something relevant. At least do what you like and give it your all. And and understanding that the biggest risk is becoming bitter and feeling that you've missed it. That is something that I know that they were and are. Those of them who are still alive were haunted by. And I think that is kind of that is why that has become a founding kind of formulation for me and my brothers and sister.
It's a very, very powerful statement. I'm sure it's going to be one of the quotes of this episode. So you found yourself back then, and also nowadays, helping yourself to bring everything out through writing. Let's talk a little bit about writing and the power of writing, both as human beings, but both as founders, and how it actually helps us to reflect, to dive deeper, to understand where you're coming and where we're going. And if you want, also share with us a little bit about Yoav and the new book that is in process.
Yes, I love that book. Yeah, happy to talk more about that. Writing is a fascinating topic, and we're gonna have a few hours to discuss writing. But let me say a few observations. First and foremost, the act of writing is something that allows you to practice what we just talked about. What do you really feel? What do you really want? What are you really facing? I mean, all these key questions are things that manifest themselves in the act of writing. So I think it's not coincidental that, I was kind of obsessed with all these questions when I was young, and I ended up, becoming a writer. The second thing that I said, this is something that I think founders should know too, and by the way, my into the founders universe / jungle was through working with founders and CEOs on story. Because the second thing that I want to say is that story is a structure that is aesthetically profound and beautiful, and there's an architecture to the story. So if you are one of those people who like, the math of beautiful things, then you end up being really interested in things like story, because you start to look at things and say, well, in the 90 minutes of this creation, like in minute 12, almost always this happens, and there's a hero, and there's a villain, and there's action, and there's obstacles, and there's conflict, and all these things suddenly start becoming something you notice, and then you say, well, let me see if I can do it. It's like an architecture, or someone who wants to build something, or someone who wants to code. So instead of being an engineer who builds a recorder in your shop, you start building stories. And I was really attracted to that aspect of story, and I still am. And I became eventually became a teacher of the fundamentals of story, and someone who writes story themselves. Last thing that I'd say, again, in the context of founders, and I always say it, and I don't know if people fully believe me, because from the beginning of the conversation,
I can tell that it's like music to my ears, and I can just keep on listening to you. First of all, you have a very, very calming voice.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, because you have this phenomenon ability to use words, and I'm also very verbal, but you're a writer.
Years of practice.
So I need to practice more. So you really have this ability to choose. You're not thinking about it. It comes to you very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But to use the right words that knows how to play emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also something, if we'll take it to the founder's world or the founder's universe, the way you describe it.
I said jungle.
Jungle. You said, first of all, universe, then jungle. So let's say creates a jungle verse, משהו כזה, something like that. So the ability to really create a good story and bring our emotions into it, that's what creates the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, in my lectures to accelerators and VCs and startups, when I talk about this point exactly, I like to bring them the story of Bram from the Games of Thrones,
mm-hmm.
because they choose him not because he was the best, army leader or commander, or the oldest, or the strongest, or because he knows how to tell stories, and
mm-hmm.
he knows how to bring everyone together around a narrative, around a story. And that is something which is very, very strong, because stories remain.
Mm-hmm.
All we have, history is a story. It's a history of someone who wrote it, right? So all we have, and also by being founders and bringing our truth and bringing our innovation into the VC world, and when we want to raise fund, or even when we want to bring users, we give them a promise wrapped in a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're bringing and what we're doing nowadays to you, and the way that it will impact your life, is a story. Now, it's not a story in the bad sense of the word, like we're selling something which is not real. Stories mm-hmm. can be very real. They're not necessarily in the negative interpretation. It's just the way that also help us to bring new ideas into the world and to others to remember them, because it played an emotional part.
So here's one quick observation. Mm-hmm. Story is not something that is untrue or unreal. Story is all it is a technology. Mm-hmm. It's a technology, like this microphone has a technology.
Maybe technique or technology?
It's a technology in the sense that it has an optimal engineering. And if it will be built in the right way, it will work in the optimal way. And if it won't be built in the optimal way, then it will work less. Just like we go to a movie and we say, up to the end, up to the middle, it was great, and then it fell apart. Why?
It has a formula.
It has a formula. Mm-hmm. And there's a smart Greek called Aristotle, who sat down 200 years ago and wrote what the architecture is and what the technology is, and it's the same. Mm-hmm. It's the same manual. So
I love those observations of yours.
Yeah, I mean it's all credit to that genius Greek.
And you have Greek roots.
Yeah.
Everything connects. You see, it's a story,
connects.
right? It all connects.
He's my uncle, Aristotle Gaon.
So back to stories.
So coming on of that, just to say to the people who are listening who may be founders, you can learn how to build and engineer a well-crafted story. This is not something that you need to be born with. You might be a natural storyteller, but there's an architect, much like you don't need to write code to build a tech company. There's things that you can learn that would end up helping you crafting and telling stories that will work.
I will add to it that although it's something that you can also learn how to do, I prefer the authentic approach. And I think that when you bring your true emotions and feelings into the equation of the story,
agree with you more.
So that makes magics. And this is something else, and it's a different level. And this is something that also, when you talk about competition, right? Because being a founder of a startup, you need to be first to market, and you have other competitors, and you have to be with a hand on the pulse and to see how you continue leading. And I think that once you bring your fully self into it, and that requires you to be really connected with your brand, with your product, with your service, with the technology, whatever it is, then this is a different level of your way to engage with investors, with users, with external or strategic partnerships, because then you touch people.
People are very quick to identify when you're true and real and authentic and when you're not. And I think, much like all of us would be attracted to someone who comes into your room and acts in a very natural and authentic way, it would be the same for anyone that you're going to meet, including investors, employees, et cetera, et cetera. So, and as an added bonus, it just saves a lot of time because you don't need to keep up a fake,
which is a lot of energy.
It's exhausting, and running a company and starting a company is hard in itself. So, as a writer, one of the things that you learn is that if you get stuck, if you're on your 150th draft, something is not working. You are not writing. You haven't identified why you're doing this. Why are you writing a story about, the Swedish guy stuck in a snowstorm in the Ukraine? You're not Swedish. You're not Ukrainian. You grew up in a hot country. You're not going to be able to write the story, even if you kind of convince yourself that this is the story that you should be writing. It's going to be much easier if you write a story about a guy who grew up in Ramat Sharon and has 4 brothers or 3 brothers and a sister, and wants to do something. And much like people say, write about things that you know. I think we need to. If you get to that point in your life that you start a company and run a company, please run a company that you care about, because otherwise it's just not going to work.
I want to add something to that and connect also, the stories and the book and running a company. So one of the things that I do with my founders that I work with, and also by myself, I'm now writing a book as well, and you know about it. So in a way, it's a kind of a therapeutic tool or some kind of resolution. It helps you to get to some kind of resolutions and understandings, because once you put those thoughts and ideas on the paper or on the Notion or the Google Doc, doesn't matter, each method that you choose, and there's a different, I think, advantage to do it really with a hand and a paper, with a pen and a paper. Things are coming out. And it really creates a lot of clarity, but also an emotional roller coaster, because things are coming out. And really some part of the days as founders, and we have so many things to deal with and so many feelings, and we're feeling frustrated, and we're feeling tired, and we're feeling burnout, and we're feeling alone, we're feeling lonely, right? And we'll talk about it in a few minutes. And we're feeling that we don't know. And we feel that we feel confused, and we'll feel that sometimes, we just give promises, and maybe we have a great vision, but we have no idea how to deliver it. So we feel this gap and this dissonance. So there are so many emotions there, and sometimes just being able to put them on the paper, just give it space. It gives us a space, and that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to put it on a piece of paper and just to read it later on and to tell ourselves, okay, this is how we're feeling now, and that's okay. And it has a place in this world to these feelings. And I see, I don't know, maybe it's because it's people around me, but I see that many 40 years old, more or less now, and many founders, and they're writing books nowadays. And I can mention Dear Shaul, and I can mention Yaniv, and I can mention you, and I can mention Iris, and myself, and there are many, many others, which is, I really feel, I see it as a good thing. And it's not necessarily about entrepreneurship. Sometimes it is, sometimes just prose or something, sometimes it's even literature, okay? They feel this need to connect to themselves again because something was lost during this journey, during this way. They needed so much to be in a high achieving levels all the time, and like to be on the stage all the time in a specific a way or specific aspect that others expected them, and they need to bring their inner self out. Yep. So this is also something that happens now, and I really like it. Take us to, how did you feel that you're solving, I'm joking here a little bit, having a twin brother who's playing basketball all the time through a book.
Well, it's not only that he's playing basketball. He was
the good-looking guy who played
great-looking
basketball.
Guy. He was the basketball star of our high school. All the young, beautiful women, girls were in love with him. And I was his twin brother.
So there was Yoav. And there was his twin brother.
Yeah, there was his twin brother. But what's his name? Boaz is Yoav's brother. That was his name. I'm writing a novel now, which I'm close to finishing, in the sense that this is like the 6th rewrite, and we at some point, if you want, we can talk about the importance of rewriting, which is even more important than writing. Which is a story of twin brothers, who's one of the brothers was a basketball legend in high school, and didn't end up becoming a basketball legend. And his brother became a writer, and he returns to Israel when they're, at the end of their 40s, and life has not exactly happened to both of them the way they wanted or they hoped. Especially the writer brother became very successful, and then when we were meeting him when there's a campaign of canceling his book because of some sort of a political issue, and he decides to bring his brother back to the court. So that's the book. It's called Yoav, which is what the audience used to scream when Yoav was on the court.
And his brother used to say, Yoav's brother. But you know what? I think his brother sat in the audience and said, wow, that's really amazing that you can get an audience to that state. And I think that's the genesis of my, writing / creative career. And it's like it has if it's not too personal if you want to share, but a beautiful moment when you actually give it to him, right? To read. It's kind of closure, right?
Oh, that was crazy. There's a part in the book where the brother takes his basketball legend brother to a guy who is a guy who works with basketball players on shooting, kind of fixing their hand. And when I was writing the book, I was doing all these things. So it was like, so what if I wanted to bring Yoav back to become a player, what would I have to do? And one of the things, so I went and spoke to a sports agent, and I eventually spoke to this guy who works with players, and I went there and did a class. And there's a chapter about both of them, the brothers, going to that class. And then when we had our 50th birthday, that was my present to him, the first draft of the book. And and I give him the draft, and he hasn't read the book, obviously the book, and doesn't know that I went to that guy. And then he says, well, my present to Boaz, I don't know if you know this, but Boaz wasn't, a basketball player, but he was a very good shooter. So I went to this guy, and it's the same guy, the guy who works with players, and I booked him a shooting class with me, and we're going to do this together. And then I say to him, open the book, and on chapter 23, it's that, and he was
what
shocked.
a closure! What a closure!
It was very moving.
You're very moving and full of emotions yourself, and I want to say something and tell me if you agree, and then we can dive into it. Because when you're talking about Yoav through the book, and when you're talking about your father and him leaving you and the family, and when you're talking also about your path, to abroad and having your show there and play there, and like many, many different steps in your career, in your journey, I hear another layer beneath it. And you can say that Yoav, again, not the real Yoav, but Yoav in the book, okay? We're not talking about real Yoav, just the metaphoric one. He may be very successful in basketball, but there's also something else there. He may be feeling very lonely in being in such a position and with so many expectations. And when you're talking about your dad, so he may be very successful and leading the Israeli economy in a way, but there's also a gap there between his attendance at home and maybe the loneliness that the people at home feeling. And also if you take it one step ahead, so when he gets ill and you understand that he won't be here for much longer, there's also another gap that opens there and another hole in the heart. And again, a feeling of loneliness. And that resonates, and that brings into the equation like why Wisdo has begun and what actually lies in the basics of Wisdo. So tell us a little bit about what it means to be lonely from your experience and the way you see it as a founder, and why loneliness is one of the most difficult and common together things that we see around us. And another point that we sometimes don't even see it. People can be so lonely and we're not seeing it. And I can say from my point of view that one of the major pains that founders share with me all the time is how lonely they feel. And also, it doesn't matter if they have co-founders or not. Also with co-founders, and also when it's with co-founders and strong and good relations, they still feel very, very lonely because no one else, unless someone like them in the same position, can understand the heaviness of this burden, of this responsibility, of this promise to take this company to greatness, to bring a lot of money and ROI to the investors, to manage so many salaries, to be okay with what happens at home. So there's loneliness in so many levels of our life. So take us to the loneliness journey that you're trying to solve.
It's a fascinating world and a fascinating investigation. Loneliness is something that is often misunderstood, and we've stumbled into it. I mean, we started Wisdo a few years ago with a very kind of simple hypothesis of there has to be a better way to connect people to other people in a way that is different than what social networks do. And, and yes, it started after I lost my dad, and I felt the difficulty of meeting people online that would be able to be helpful to you and people around you. So that is the very naive and very innocent gap that we've started with. What has happened in the past 3 years is that loneliness has become an epidemic and a condition. So what has happened in healthcare is that loneliness is considered as a condition that leads to mental and physical illness to the degree that 124 million Americans, as you said in the intro, self-report as lonely. And the best way to understand loneliness, and this is maybe a test to your listeners, ask yourselves, do you answer to the following criteria? And if so, you are lonely, and you need to do something about it.
So what are the criteria?
So loneliness is a gap between the human relationships that you have in your life and the human relationships that you would like to have in your life, very, very simply. And the largest that gap, the lonelier you are. It's not a matter of, are you married? Do you have a co-founder? Do you have a lot of friends? If you are, and this actually goes back to the beginning of our conversation, if you are living a life that has led you to a point where you're surrounded with people that you don't feel that you can be close to and vulnerable with and open and authentic with, you are lonely, and that gap is not going to close by itself.
I want just to emphasize it because the way you've described it and defined it is so simple to understand, to grasp, and it even raises a much more, I think, difficult question, because we have many relationships in our life. It can be husband, wife, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends, co-founders, parents, brothers, partners in other businesses, many kind of relationships that allegedly it looks like we are surrounded, right? But what you're saying is actually identifying this gap between the relationships that you have and the gap of how you really aspire them to be, want them to be. I mean, you can have many relationships, but you don't feel present in them. You don't feel empowered by them. You feel alone within those relationships. And this is a very, very powerful thing to understand.
Exactly. I mean, the opposite, if you want to see a bad example, again, it goes back to the idea of social networks, where you are introduced to people based on how popular they are, provocative they are. You won't open up to them if something very, very personal is going to open up and happen in your life, because you won't feel that you are safe doing that. So the interesting development from a business perspective is that since that has grown into an epidemic, and the number of lonely people, at least in the U.S., has grown 13% since 2018. It's 60% of people 18 to 65, and 30% of people 65 and above self-define as lonely. The good thing that has happened is that healthcare has started treating loneliness as a condition, and it starts with measurement. So just like there are measurements that can diagnose whether you have diabetes or you have something as challenging and horrible as cancer or any other healthcare condition, there's a measurement that has A, been developed over the past decade, and B, is now implemented across healthcare that you can take, and that the answer is going to diagnose you as either not lonely or severely lonely.
A question. As a loneliness professor, expert, like in the song, and please forgive me if I'm confusing the words because I usually do it, but like all the lonely people, where do they all come from, right?
Yeah.
These are the words, something like that. So
exactly the words.
Good one to me. Usually it's not. So was it always like that and we didn't speak about it, or we didn't see it, or
No,
there were less digital platforms to see it, or that nowadays it went really bad and it's
never
much more
been
severe?
this bad. It's never been this bad in the history of the human race. This is something that started about 2 decades ago. The World Health Organization was the first to identify that something very wrong is happening to human connections. And it's grown. It's been growing ever since. A turning point in the ability to treat it, and eventually, financial implications come into play as well, is when healthcare also identified that the differences between someone who is lonely and someone who's not lonely are anywhere between $2,000 to $10,000 in additional medical costs because of mental and physical illness conditions that could have been prevented if a social health protective measure would have been available to that person in the right time. So the fact that this has become a $200 billion problem is now pushing healthcare to come up with ways to identify and diagnose loneliness and then ways to treat it, which is a result of the size of the problem.
Allegedly, it seems like something simple to help decrease the level of loneliness, right? You can ask your colleague or the person who sits next to you in the bus or on the airplane or in the neighborhood. How are you? How do you feel? Can I help you with something?
Do you know a lot of people who do that?
So allegedly, it's something very simple and even very human, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're in the Human Founder, like very, very even expected to do. But what happened to us as society that it's not happening enough, and that you're talking about a $2 billion problem, $2 billion problem for caregivers that can actually decrease it through digital platforms to other solutions, because we as human don't care anymore?
No, I think there are at least 5 trends that contributed to the state of affairs. One is social networks. We are all on them. We all go to them to form healthy human connections in a product that was not built to help you feel more connected. It was built to sell ads. So the fact that we all go to a solution that wasn't built for that is part of the problem.
And it's even getting worse, right? With the metaverse. It's really even increasing it, no?
Let's see what happens with the metaverse. I don't know if it's going to be that common spread. It still feels like more of a gamer kind of thing. And by the way, that might be a good thing, because maybe there's going to be a community of gamers, of people who get to know each other and have deeper connections, rather than something that hundreds of billions of people are expected to use.
I just had Natalie Zohar here discussing about the metaverse, and we spoke about the mental aspects of it, and it's really something to observe and to see where it's going, because definitely the human connections is something that will be needed to be addressed in a very different manner. So you said 5 trends. So one is the social networks that actually allegedly it's supposed to create a community and bring us together, but de facto it's the opposite.
There are 2 decades worth of research into how social networks decrease a sense of feeling connected and decrease mental health. And the heavy users are going to be more prone to feeling lonely and disconnected rather than more. So that's one thing that we need to take into consideration. The second is the lifespan. People live longer. 30% of people 65 plus in the U.S. live alone, which is an incredible statistic. And that is partly because, families have grown apart. The workforce is concentrated in urban areas, and people who, live alone and are older either stay in where they originally grew up, or end up, joining a home where their family can live them. But the percentage of older people who live alone has risen. And then what has also risen is just overall health. I mean, 40% of the U.S. population has a chronic condition. And that has also always not has been the case for the past, 50 years. And loneliness coupled with an existing chronic condition is a comorbidity situation that can aggravate a sense of feeling alone and also end up accelerating illness. So this has not suddenly come up. This is something that humanity has essentially drove itself into a corner until a point where the financial institutions that are expected to pay the tab for all these trends, primarily health insurance companies and employers who pay the price for their employees' health, are saying, we can no longer afford this. We need to do something about it. And we're willing to invest money, just like we're investing money in people's physical health. We need to invest money in their social health. And that's where Wisdo kicks in.
So actually, you took your why and your life experiences and the things that actually shaped you, and you brought it into Wisdo and what you're actually trying to do.
So we took a look at that question that you just asked, which is what are the provisions of social health? What are the aspects of human connections that can help people feel socially healthy, supported, and not alone? And it turns out that there's been research into that question. We're working with one of the world's biggest thinkers in the world of loneliness, the guy who actually co-developed the UCLA 3 scale, which is the standard litmus test for measuring someone who's lonely or not lonely, used by, global healthcare institutions. And Professor Dan Russell, who's a great guy, by the way, he's Iowa-based, one of the sweetest people in the world, not only identified way in the 60s and 70s when he was a young researcher in UCLA, which is why it's called the UCLA 3 scale, he kept on working to say, well, let's see, based on your UCLA diagnosis, what are the specific provisions that can lower loneliness as quickly and as effectively as possible. And it turns out there are 4 provisions. One is emotional support. So if you're surrounded with people that are not offering you emotional support and are not saying things and practicing things like, saying, I hear you, I see you, I care about you, you will not feel emotionally supported and you will feel alone. The second is a sense of worth. If you are surrounded by people who constantly remind you that you're not good enough, you will feel more alone. The third is a sense of belonging. If you feel that you're not in the right place, you have 1,000 friends. You have 1,000,000 friends. If you think that you're not part of that community, you should be in a different community, then you will feel alone. And then the fourth, which I love, by the way, is called reliable alliance, which is the whole idea of internalizing that there are people in the world that you can help. Somewhere in the world, there are people that are counting on what life has taught you, and they can benefit from your type of support. If you can introduce these 4 provisions into the type of human connections that you are making, and I think everyone's listening is saying, well, that is the furthest from Facebook and TikTok possible, then you will move people from 9 on the UCLA 3 scale to 3 and end up saving anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000 a year. And that is what we do.
So being very practical and not just like high-level conversations, what you just mentioned about the 4 provisions that we want to make sure that we have it in our working place, in our startups, even from our board members, in our families, in our school for the children around us, in the youth movement, wherever, any kind of group. And it's really practical tool for managers and leaders and co-founders to ask themselves, I'll rephrase it differently. I like to ask my founders, ask yourself why others should follow you. Why should they follow you? And ask yourself as a founder, as a CEO, as a C-level, or even as a senior or a manager, do I allow emotional support to my people? Do I feel myself a sense of worth? And do I, in my managerial skills and capabilities, help my employees, the people who work with me, to feel a sense of worth? Do I feel a sense of belonging? Sometimes when we make career changes is because we don't feel that we fit to the culture, that we don't feel like part of the group, part of the gang, that we don't speak the same language. So maybe I have a very high salary and maybe these are really good perks and conditions, but I don't feel belong to this environment. And do I have a reliable alliance, which at work, it can be a peer, it can be a mentor, it can be someone outside of work. As co-founders, it's my co-founder if I feel that I can rely on them and he's here for me. And these are really, really practical advices and tools to ask ourselves in any surrounding. Do they happen? Do I have it? Do I, in the way I lead, give it to others? Because it's a two-way street to see that I provide it and that I gain it. And it's really, really powerful. Boaz, will soon hit the pause because I want to allow our listeners the ability to
call in. That's when we take a few calls from our audience.
Take a few calls from our audience, but really to have the ability to observe everything we just said and to reflect on themselves. But I do want to bring outside like few main things that I took from our conversation and to find it to the listeners and also to you. One of the main thinkings is just as simple as that, just to be kind, to be kind, first of all, to ourselves, but also to the people around us, to our family, partners, co-founders, employers, employees, to be kind. We forget a little bit to be kind because we're stressed, because it's so hectic, because there are so many high expectations, and we forget to be kind. And I think this is one of the basic things that can help others not to feel lonely. It can be to someone in the street, and it can be in the workplace. Second thing, we spoke about telling stories. And if I'll make a small closure, so everything you just did in this podcast, this is usually what happens here, right? I help my interviewees to tell their stories, but you did it very professionally. And it's just not telling the story. It's also the other point of bringing your emotions into your conversation, because you came here not as a storyteller, but as a founder, right? Because this is the Human Founder podcast. But also in your startup, you bring your whole self into it. And I think this is what makes it very, very powerful. And also another thing that I noticed, and this is another beautiful tip to you, the listeners, when you spoke about Professor Dan Russell, or you spoke about other things, when you describe people, and this is also something I do. I remember that a friend reflected it to me 20 years ago. Gali, when you name people, you always put it with the Yud Besof, you make it a nickname. It comes to you naturally, and I never thought about it. But it's something that I do. I call people, I mean, not in the first moment, but later on, with an I at the end, the apostrophe and I, as a nickname. And it comes from a sense of warmth and really loving people. And it makes the other side feel in totally different place, and it makes him softer, or he or she, depends. And that creates a different environment. And you do the same when you say he's really sweet, he's very nice, he's really...
he likes to complain about the weather every time that we chat.
You really give a lot of credit in an emotional, nice way to the people you talk about. And that creates warmth in our leadership. It allows us to be more vulnerable. And it also allows the other person to feel belonging, that he's wanted.
Sense of worth.
Exactly. So all these provisions that you mentioned, we don't necessarily have to think about them, just to implement them into our, day-to-day, to insert our emotions into the conversations.
I want to say something as a founder, just because I know my people. Let me say the following. The reason that is important to do this is not just because it will make you feel better because you think that, that's not important. People are going to leave companies if they don't feel a sense of worth and they're not feeling emotionally supported. The health of your, company, the people that you work with, the people that you want to bring on board, this has tangible, practical benefits. Once you begin to practice them accordingly. So, there's a reason that we're working with some of the largest health insurance companies in the U.S. because it works and it saves a ton of money. So, again, this is something as practical as, running 2 times a week. You have to do this, otherwise there's going to be a financial price to pay.
Financial and emotional, of course, and also understanding that new generations, they differently. And we as leaders, as managers, as founders, growing our companies, we also need how to address, to know how to address new generations that have a different mindset. And also from where you're coming from and really aspiring to solve or help solving the epidemic of loneliness in the world, which is a silent one, because we don't speak about it too much, or we don't necessarily feel it until it touches us or someone who's close to us. And then all of a sudden we feel it.
I actually think that all of us feel it. It's just that we don't acknowledge it as a condition.
I agree. And we're not allowing ourselves necessarily to speak it out loud. I remember a close friend who's a very famous founder, CEO in an intimate group, shared that everyone are inviting him to give talks and to speak about his success in the startup, etc., etc. But he couldn't feel more lonelier, because he feels that always someone wants something from him. And it's not the real him. It's the him with the costume, of being a founder, a very successful one that had 3 exits, and that's what they want from him. But underneath, he feels really, really lonely. And that was first of all, so touching, but allowing himself to bring himself in this way into this group was very, very, very powerful. And this is actually my wish to you, whether you're founders or leaders or regular people with any title, just as persons, first of all, be kind to the people around you and see a little bit deeper, the surface. Look a little bit deeper than just the surface. Every one of us suffer from loneliness in different areas. It can be in our, intimate life. It can be in our parenthood. It can be in our friendships. It can be in our working environment. Just to be a little bit more gentle and see it and just reach your hand to other people can really, really make a difference. And Boaz, I really hope that the Wisdo will, be a huge success, and not just for 124 millions of Americans, but to the whole world, and really help us in this really serious epidemic.
Yeah, well, we're on it. We're doing our best. It's doable. I mean, it's again. I think the only thing that was good about COVID is that it brought loneliness and mental health to really the forefront of healthcare's concerns. And there's a real attempt now to solve this problem, at least scale it back. I always say, just the last comment, that it's the closest thing that I can think about in the context of loneliness is climate. Suddenly we woke up and looked around and said, the world is going to pieces, and we need to understand why this happened, and understand how this can be scaled back, and invest resources in scaling it back. So humanity has took a turn for the worse in terms of the health in human connection making. That thing that has always been why culture has either prospered or died. And the only good thing is that COVID, helped us all understand that we are not islands, and we are connected to other people, and the health of those relationships is something that needs investment.
And although we said that social networks were not designed for connections, but for ads, but with technology, we can make this leap, and we can help, bridge this gap of loneliness of people around the world. And it's definitely side by side with the challenges. It's definitely an exciting time to be living in, which, thanks to technology and different mechanisms and algorithms that we can put into it, we can really help solve major problems. Yep. So thank you, first of all, for coming and bringing your all and sharing. And I really loved it, how everything connects, you being a writer and you being a founder, and you have this unique family to speak about and find your own voice within it. So to me, everything is connected. So really, thank you for sharing it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and credit for what you're doing. It's hard to be a founder, and it's hard to be human. So, the fact that you're helping people do both is pretty amazing.
Thank you. People who wants to reach out to you, or to Wisdo, or to invest, or to work with you, where can they find you?
Just email me, Boaz, Boaz, at Wisdo, Wisdo.com.
So guys, don't forget to be kind, to write your stories, and really to choose your own path and go for it, and not necessarily what everyone else are expecting you. To our lovely listeners, we're going to hit pause until the next episode. That's also something I say to the entrepreneurs in my clinic in between sessions, right? If you enjoyed listening, I would really appreciate it if you share the podcast with people who you think would derive value from it. Thanks to the amazing studios at Google Campus that allows me to record all this content in here. Feel free to visit my website at galiblochliran.com and leave there your details if you wish to be updated and learn more about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Also, be sure to follow my podcast, The Human Founder, in any of your podcast apps, and to rate it so it will rise to the top and continue to deliver all this content to you. Let's hit pause till next time. Thanks, Boaz.
Thanks, guys.
Ciao.